My name is Susan Gladstone Pasternak, the Executive Director of the Jewish Museum of Florida, FIU, and I'm excited to be moderating a conversation virtually with director Tammy Federman, who has directed the film Black Flowers, which is premiering at this year's festival. Thank you all so much for joining us. So let me start, Tammy, by welcoming you. Thank you so much for being with us today. And let's just start with a little bit of information about you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your filmmaking career?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be screening my film in your festival. So I'm very honored to be here and telling these stories and being part of this. So it's a big honor for me. Well, I've been sort of into the arts since I was a little girl. I went to a theater school since I was in first grade and performing arts. And all throughout my life, I've been very passionate about filmmaking, about art, about theater, about music. I also went to high school in Israel, which was an art school as well. In my military service, I was in the Israeli Defense Army Forces, but I was in the entertainment corps. So I was singing for troops. And I started off as a musician and a singer-songwriter for many years. And I performed for many years. I toured all over the world, working with musicians in South America, sort of all over the world. And I always had the dream of incorporating my music with the visual element and taking storytelling to another medium, not just the visual element, but also not only the musical element, but also adding the visual and the storytelling element to it. And a few years ago, I sort of ended up directing my first documentary. It was the story of, it sort of happened very organically. I had a sister who was an Israeli artist. She was a political, social artist, and she passed away, and she left an enormous amount of footage of her life, of her artwork, her personal life, and it was sort of given to me and I was left with this incredible task of making a film about her life. And initially I was very overwhelmed by it, but I had this very deep urge to make this film. And I made a movie about her life, and it ended up premiering at Jerusalem Film Festival in Israel, which was an incredible honor for me as a first-time filmmaker. And that film sort of had a life of its own. It started touring festivals and telling this incredible story of my sister's art and her life. And when it finished, I realized that I wanted to continue in this path of telling people's stories, of working not only, as I said, with the sound element, but also with the visual storytelling. And then I started doing this film, which you've seen hopefully and hopefully
Yes.
enjoyed. And
Yes.
also incorporates these themes of art and life and how people deal with trauma through art, which is themes that I'm very, very passionate and drawn to. So,
Well, so yes, so that's a very interesting background that leads up to this film. So let's start talking a little bit about Black Flowers. So the basic description of the film is that this is the story of 5 Holocaust survivors. It doesn't tell us anything about who they are, really, a little bit, but not about the details. And we know from reading the description that they're all artists of some sort, all different mediums. But the film is really about so much more than that. And the things that they have in common are so much deeper than just they are Holocaust survivors. So let me start by asking you a couple of questions about the most obvious common themes. These are all people who were children during the Holocaust, right? We frequently think of Holocaust survivors as people who were adults and then post-Holocaust were producing art that were images of things that they specifically saw in one camp or another. That's not what this is at all. These artists were all children. And their art takes on a very specific form, I believe, even though it's all in different mediums, as a result. So could you please tell us how you came to this idea of specifically dealing with the art of children Holocaust survivors? And in addition, at the same time, how did you find them?
It's a very interesting question, and it's really interesting. As I said, even getting to making movies was very homogenic. I always believe that the journey is wiser than the person who takes to treads on the path. So sometimes you enter a story and you know exactly what's going to happen. But my experience in life, the greatest things that have happened to me, I almost stumbled upon them, and they had this way of happening. So I really wanted to work with Holocaust survivors. And unfortunately, it's incredibly hard to find Holocaust survivors and these people who are quite old, right? I know they're quite elderly, and they were children. And I really wanted to work with Holocaust survivors and to find people who are actually expressing their story or dealing with their trauma through art, which connects very much to my first film, because my sister was an artist and she was
Mhm.
ill, and part of her work was dealing with her trauma through art. That's something that I'm very passionate about. And I think for all of the people in the film, what's very enlightening, although it's not a very light topic, what's enlightening and inspiring about them is that they're people who are very connected to life, people who are very creative, who in some ways sort of heal the trauma of their past through their art, who are sort of connected to their childhood once again through their art. I mean, if you look at Jenny, for example, who's a painter, her paintings are a little bit childlike, and they're very childish, and in a way she's sort of regaining back her youth that was sort of brutally taken from her. So I think art is really a way for these people to not only express their trauma, and sort of, even Jenny explains that she takes the trauma out of her and she can observe it as an observer from the outside, and sort of it's
Mhm.
not so much internalized, it can be expressed, and also a way for them to actually feel a part of life. And I believe that art, if you look at humanity, it's one of the greatest and most beautiful things that humanity has created. And that's something that I'm very interested in, even in a complicated topic such as the Holocaust, to actually deal with the beauty of art and its healing components, and how they're
Mhm.
able to connect to that childlike creativity and tell their story, and actually heal themselves through it. So that's something I'm very
And
interested
yes, how did you find this particular group of 5 people?
Yes, it was really challenging to find Holocaust survivors who are still able to tell their stories and who wanted to participate.
Mhm.
Um, I worked with someone who, I don't know, a researcher, you would say. Her name was Kim. And she helped me very much. And there were a few people. There was one person who was incredible, and in the end, he didn't want to take part in the film. He was this incredible Holocaust survivor who was sculpting. He isn't in the movie. I only did one interview with him. He sculpts Pinocchio out of wood characters. And I mean, just all of the people. In the end, he was quite shy. He didn't want to participate, and I wasn't able to convince him. But each one of them, sort of, we magically managed to find, and it wasn't easy. We were also doing it during COVID, so we were very limited. There was a certain time when people were isolated, and I was
Mhm.
incredibly worried about their health and if I will be able to film them again and to finish this film. So I'm very grateful that they participated, that they told their stories. I felt great responsibility also to get these stories to be told, because
Mhm.
for example, Ruti, who was the last survivor to speak, when I thanked her for taking part in the film, it was incredibly emotional for me, because she said she wanted to thank us, because only after she had done the interview, she realized that she can now sit with her children and actually tell her children and her
Mhm.
grandchildren what went through in the Holocaust. And so the fact that she took part in this film gave her sort of the ability to take a step further in her healing
Mhm.
and to tell her story for the first time. So I feel great responsibility for these people's stories, and a great honor that they were willing to share these very personal, difficult stories, and to share these stories with people, that these stories are being told and heard. I think it's of deep,
Right.
deep value.
And you've given them a life to continue to be told through watching the film. Were you actually interviewing them? We don't hear you. They're just telling their stories. But in the actual making of the film, were you sitting in front of them and interviewing them?
Some of the interviews I did by myself. Some of the interviews I did with someone I worked with who is incredibly gifted
Mhm,
filmmaker. His name is Itai Raziel, and he did incredible filming work. And some of it I was, due to COVID, I couldn't fly, so some of that he did by himself, and he sent me the footage and we discussed it. And I was sort of doing it with the limited ability to fly and with what I
mhm,
do. But there were also many interviews that I filmed by myself, which I felt in the end that my filming wasn't as good or as strong enough,
mhm,
but it was more of a research. But luckily, we ended up having enough footage to tell this story and to get these
mhm,
stories across, because I think the stories themselves are unbelievable. I mean, they're incredible stories of how these people managed to survive, and it's all just miraculous, the fact that they did actually survive in
mhm,
such circumstances. And not only that, these people are functioning, inspiring, people who have families, who are creative. That to me is beyond the story of a historical story of, and
mhm,
meaningful Holocaust. It's a story, it's something about the human spirit, that people can endure, they can survive, and they can thrive, and they can take such deep trauma and still create a very meaningful, beautiful life.
mhm.
So I'm very inspired by that, and
Right.
I'm drawn to that.
So you've brought up a few of the themes that I believe I saw in the film. So let me ask you about them. You just mentioned one. I'm going to tell you these three, and then you can answer the. So one of the things I noticed in the stories is that almost each and every one, if not every single one of them, had something miraculous that happened that enabled them to survive as children. Each one of them had a sort of a miracle story to tell. The second thing that I saw that was very much thematic is that because they're children, they were children, they didn't necessarily have distinct memories. They had more emotional response. And so their art isn't specifically imagery from the Holocaust, but more an expression of their own trauma through whichever medium they've chosen, but the imagery is not specifically Holocaust. And the third thing is that almost each and every one said they never wanted to talk to their family about it prior to um, doing this film or something similar that enabled them to start talking about it. Would you address those?
Well, I think the first thing you said was, sorry,
Miracles. Each one of them had some sort of a miracle that enabled them to survive
yes.
as
So
children.
definitely agree with that. I mean, the circumstances that something happened, that in 1 second, it was just the when you read stories of the Holocaust, the line between life and death,
Mhm.
it's like a split second that someone was there, that
Right,
Sadio, when he talks about the part that he managed to hold his trousers and walk for,
right.
it's almost, you cannot believe that these people managed to survive. And I think all of them have within them this innate power, or it was in the footage, but it didn't come into the film. Sadia, for example, said that he used to sing to himself. They had these things to help themselves live, so that he used to sing to himself when he was walking and he was alone, to help himself. Or they used to imagine how they will see their family one day, or these sort of things. It's also their personality. I think it's a combination of, I would say, maybe circumstance, and the lack that they had in a certain time, but also within them a certain personality that allowed them to survive. And with regards to the second thing, will you remind me?
They all had something miraculous happen to them. Um, they each one of them had said prior to this experience with you or something similar, they didn't want to talk about their Holocaust experience with their families.
Yes, I think this is something that I see from a lot of Holocaust survivors. They didn't want to bring a sad home. They didn't want to have a
Right.
sad home, a home of children. They didn't want to bring the trauma into the home, but the trauma is there. So it subconsciously it arises. I think, as Ruthie said, that when she hears an alarm, it reminds her. She doesn't
Mhm.
want children's heads to their shave their heads. And she always felt that the children didn't feel that she was a Holocaust survivor, but it was there. So I think that it's very important, and I'm very grateful that at the end they did manage to tell their stories, because there are a lot of Holocaust survivors. I have friends who don't know the stories of their grandparents, and their grandparents unfortunately passed away, and it remains unknown. And a lot of these people, it was too difficult for them even to tell the story, to go back to those memories, and that's very difficult, to live with the unknown, to carry this burden of an untold story in the family. So
Mhm.
I'm very honored that they were able to share that, even there for their own healing, for their family. And I think that connects in many ways to the last thing you mentioned, which I do remember, that um, that I think the imagery isn't very specific, like you said. It's almost the subconscious. So
Mhm.
Ruby's paintings, it's the subconscious image. She doesn't even understand how it connects to the childhood, but it does. And each one is slightly different, because with Jenny, her drawings are actually almost a storytelling of what happened to her. It's childlike, but she's telling really a story of what it looked like, what she remembers. But
Mhm.
all of them, it's almost like a dream. So much of it is about memory. Think of
Mhm.
your own memories. They're a little bit like watercolors. It's something that's sort of, it's very deep.
Mhm.
It's very powerful in your life, but you cannot even make the connections. And that's why through art, it's such a powerful medium, because it expresses itself
Mhm.
in a way that you don't understand. Um, so I love that in their art, that you can see
Yes.
that somehow it's that their creativity, but it's not, but it's almost it's association. You can't really tell, oh, this is that part of the Holocaust, but
Right.
it expresses itself through their art, and I think that's the beauty of it.
Mhm. Along the same lines, the first person interviewed, Sadia, uh, makes a comment that I thought was quite interesting and speaks to what you're saying. He said, people ask him frequently, what is this that you've created? And he quotes Picasso and says, if I could tell you what it is, I wouldn't have to make it. I would just tell you what it is. But I have
Yes.
to make it to get the feeling out. And it's not something I can just say, this is. That
Yeah.
true of many
That
of
is,
them.
to me, of one of the I think that is one of the most beautiful things about art, that you don't really, it comes from such a deep place, and deep
Mhm.
from, it's almost, you're trying to express something, you're trying to understand something, and through the art, you let it out, and then the art
Mhm.
speaks for itself, and it reveals something that you didn't even know that was within you. So I really like that quote that he said,
Mhm.
and I think that's true, that the art sort of has a life of its own, and it teaches you something about you that you didn't
Mhm.
know. I feel, even as a filmmaker, that the process also reveals itself to me. So the footage comes up, and we work with it, and then
Mhm.
sort of create this puzzle, and the film is a creation of its own.
Yeah.
But I think,
And yeah, all of the works were beautiful. Even some of the ones that were depicting something relatively concrete still had like a sparkle to them or a color to them. But I am curious how you chose the one piece of art that was black, that was a black flower, as the title of the film.
it's interesting, because I was thinking for a while for what would be the title of the film, and I connected to the idea of the black flower, because it was almost like you said, it's Jung talks about the collective subconscious, but in a way, this deep thing of the subconscious, of what she was trying to say, of what Ruti was trying to say, that she tries, like a boomerang, she tries to escape her art, her
Mhm.
trauma. She says, oh, I'll make a beautiful flower, I'll make a happy flower, but the trauma comes up, and it's a black
Mhm.
flower. And
Right.
so that idea that the subconscious is always there, and how it affects us, and how it affects for generations, and
Mhm.
and also that duality is something I'm drawn to, because that we're talking about a difficult topic, but we're addressing it through the beauty of aesthetics, and through color, and through the medium of art, which is
Mhm.
all about aesthetics and beauty.
Mhm.
To me, that tension between darkness and light, between beauty and creativity, and the horrors that they experience, and that sort of tension with these polarities, are what is very meaningful, were interesting to me as as an artist in life. And so that idea of the black flower, it's full of life, it's a flower, but it also has that darkness and that trauma
Mm-hmm.
within it. And it comes from her story as well. So I feel that that sort of portrays the idea of the
Mm-hmm.
art, trauma, and their
Yes.
ability to express the story through art.
I also found it interesting, just doing a little research about the word black flower, that there was a spotlight, a searchlight at Birkenau, Auschwitz, right where the train came in, that was identified as being like a black flower. But I know that artist was never there. So
Uh,
there's no specific connection.
no, I wasn't aware of that, but that's interesting.
It is
Thing to learn.
interesting because I wondered if on some level she was aware of that. Um, I do have a few other common themes that I'd like to ask you about, whether they were intentional or they just came to be. Each and every one of them spoke in one way or another, most of them positively, one with no memory. They all spoke extensively of their mothers,
Hmm.
somewhat their fathers, but the mothers are a huge theme throughout the storytelling. Was that something you elicited, or is that just something that we realize as they're telling their stories is a running theme?
It's interesting that you noticed that. It's so interesting in a film what people see. The experience of the
Mhm,
observer. It's something that I did see, but to me, it connected very much to the fact that they lost their childhood and that the
mhm,
warmth. I think that all of them they were missing so much the mother, the
mhm.
warmth, and that was sort of taken from them. It's such a young age, and I think they're longing when they talk about and they all had strong mothers, because Tommy said that the reason he survived was this incredible mother who fought.
Right,
A lot of the stories of children who survived in the Holocaust is these mothers who just
right,
fought for their children, who were, who did, Esther's mother who decided to give all the cigarettes and go and convince
right,
people. These are strong women who are
right.
incredible warrior queens, real
Yes, absolutely.
incredible women who fought and did incredible things to save their children. So I think these women, probably most of them, are very strong, powerful women for the actions that they did to help their children
Mhm,
survive. But also that element that these people at a very young age, they lost their mother, they lost that hug, they lost that thing that we crave as children. And perhaps this is why it comes up for them, I think.
mhm. Another theme I noticed, and again, not necessarily intentionally, but a number of them spoke to some sense of guilt, not necessarily because they survived, but because of something they might have done. Like I believe it was Sadia who speaks about dressing up like a girl and then realizing that because he's done that, he's put the entire village at risk. That's a sort of also a running theme that I think is perhaps true of children. Children tend to sort of exaggerate a trauma in a way that it's their fault or that's related to them. And I felt that was expressed as well.
It's really interesting. I think to me, it's very much what I saw was sort of the survivor's guilt. Why
Hmm.
did I survive if my whole family, passed
Hmm.
away? So many people, from their aunts to their grandmothers, all their family perished, and they were the lucky ones that out. I
Hmm.
mean, so I think that is something that is so hard to process, and so to find meaning after that and to continue living life and to be accepting of that
Hmm.
kind of loss and reality, I'm sure that that can bring about incredible amount of guilt,
Hmm.
unfortunately. And
Yes,
perhaps this is why it comes up.
it does. It comes out in the film. Also, to something you said earlier, at the end of the film, you tell us how many children and grandchildren they all have. And even though they've spoken about this great sadness in their lives, and one woman says she can never trust anyone ever, ever, ever to this day, for the most part, they all have children and grandchildren, and some of them many. They've created large families, which seems so hopeful
Yes.
from their perspective. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It was very important for me to finish the film on that kind of note, saying
Mhm,
these people, even though they went through the darkest of times, something that we cannot even comprehend, they're alive, and not only are they're not victimized, they're not constantly in that trauma. They've chosen to be a part of life, and they have children,
mhm,
and they've continued, and that is their true, victory. And
mhm,
to me, it says something about the human spirit. I mean, it is such an incredible inspiration. And when you meet Holocaust survivors, first of all, to me, it's an incredible honor to sit face to face with a Holocaust
mhm,
survivor and hear the story from them. And I think it's so important that people who youth still go to Holocaust survivors and sit with them and learn from them,
mhm,
and not let these people be isolated socially and emotionally. But a lot of the people that you meet are Holocaust survivors. These are people who are incredibly, they have such a power in them. I mean, humility, but also this power that they survived out of something that is, so difficult.
mhm,
So it was important for me to show what you just said, that these people have had children, that they've had families, they're creative, they're productive. And not only that, I think they found deep meaning in life because they're very giving to society. I mean, Tommy, for example, he works with youth. So all these people are actually
mhm,
contributing to society. Jenny fights for Holocaust survivors' rights. These people are out there, and they're making a mark, and they're living a meaningful life. And the relationships some of them have with their partners are also beautiful to see. So I'm hoping that, even though, as you said, these aren't easy stories to tell, that people have sort of felt that kind of hope as well.
mhm,
It comes with these stories, that these people are hopeful and they're engaged in life,
mhm.
that they're inspired by that, because I am.
It's a lovely part of the film, it, that is lovely to see at the end. It was a beautiful way to end the stories. But I am curious. These are presented as five individuals. It's in Hebrew, but it's not clear that they're all actually living in Israel. And so I was wondering if any of them know each other, if any of these survivors who have a very unique survival experience and have become artists have any relationship with each other.
It's interesting because, it's an interesting question. I met Esther through Tommy because I interviewed
Mm,
Tommy. It's one person led to another. They don't
mhm.
know it. The only two people who know is Tommy, who knows Esther, who is
Embroider.
yeah, I was in his house, and he said, "Oh, there's a lady, a friend who lives across the street. Maybe you should interview her as well." And I said, "Oh, I've been looking all over. Please, I'll go to her." And we went to her and we ended up filming her that day. And so they know each other. But I'm very hopeful that if everything works out, and now Israel is in a much better state with COVID, I'm going to premiere the film soon and bring them, because this is
Mhm,
really what I've been dreaming of, to give them that opportunity to premiere the film in a cinema with their families, because the
mhm,
children should hear their stories, and to give them the respect that these people, I mean, unfortunately with COVID, it's been such a difficult time. A lot of these people were isolated, were emotionally sort of having a very difficult time. So to have that experience, which I'm hoping to create for them, to screen that film and have them meet each other, like you said,
mhm.
and show this film to their grandchildren. This is hopefully something that's going to happen soon. So I'm very
That,
excited.
yes, that's terrific because I was really thinking to myself, if they don't already know each other, they should know each
Yeah,
other
I
because
agree.
they have a very unique experience, right? As children who have become artists, this is a very unique experience to this group of people. So I hope that works out for you, that you're able to do that.
Thank you so much.
Um, Let me ask you a couple more questions from your perspective. Was there any particular part of making the film that you enjoyed the most, or that was perhaps the most difficult for you personally, if you don't mind my asking, given your own trauma?
It's interesting. I feel in some ways that this is perhaps, like you said, the subconscious.
Hmm.
That perhaps I am drawn to this kind of movies from my own trauma, and my need to create art and storytelling is very similar. Obviously, it's a very
Mm-hmm.
different, is that decision to or hope to use art in a way to feel meaningful, to be of meaning to others, to be of service to other people,
Mm-hmm.
but also to find the beauty in life. Because to me, artistic expression, if you look at the Homo sapiens, we are the ones who are sort of painting in caves and trying to tell our stories
Mm-hmm.
and the mark. This is really something that's innate in us. So I think that that's also my way of sort of using creativity to heal
Mm-hmm.
my own trauma. But I think what was really special for me in this story is, for example, the story of Ruti. As I said, I almost didn't interview her. It was sort of a last minute decision to interview her. Um, she just all of a sudden someone recommended her, one of her art teachers, and I thought, you know what? Okay, let's give it a try. And then it came back, and it was so beautiful, her story, and I was so happy that I met her, and to hear her story. It was such a powerful story, and to me, just as I said, it was an honor that I was able to be there to hear that and to
Mm-hmm.
share that with the world for her. So those were very, very meaningful moments for me, and sort of finding a way to connect the puzzle. I worked with an incredible editor whose name is Yaniv Segalovich, and he's Israeli editor, very talented, and he did an incredible job of working with me and sort of connecting the puzzle. And when it did connect, those are moments when you really feel like, okay, finally, it's the pieces are connecting together.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, very meaningful experience and very meaningful journey.
I'm sure for all the participants as well. Um, I'm curious, you talked a little bit about what your hope is in terms of all of the participants being able to show see the film with their families, etc. But for our audience who has just finished watching the film, what are a few things that you hope that they have taken from the film, the messages? I've been mentioning the things that I see. What are the themes and messages you most hope our audience has taken from the film?
I think the first thing for me is to have these stories told, and that people learn about the Holocaust and they continue to know about it, because unfortunately it's not an easy time, with a lot of fake news and a lot of misinformation.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, the people with, I don't know, in London there was a period when it was quite difficult. I think it's important to respect these stories, and that these stories are being told, and that people learn and educate themselves and they know what really happened in history. Um, so that's one element that's just very important for me to be a part of that. But on the other side, I think also just the humanistic idea of the human spirit, that no matter what you go through in life, there at some point there is a choice. And I think if these Holocaust survivors can feel connected to life, if they can get out of bed and make a choice not to give up on life, then really no one has an excuse. I mean, not in a difficult way I'm saying it, but that should really give us the inspiration to find meaning in life, no matter what the trauma, no matter what the circumstance, to be of service to others, to be creative, to be connected to life, uh, to,
Mhm.
to do something that is of value. So to me, that's what it speaks of that choice to be a part of life, regardless of how difficult the trauma or what you've experienced in the past. So I'm hoping it gives people hope, an inspiration to be connected to life, because these people are, you know, they're very elderly, but they're doing beautiful things, and they're waking up in the morning and they're doing
Mhm.
sculpture, and I think it's beautiful to me. It's
Mhm.
very inspiring.
Mhm. Well, I will tell you that I did feel that. I have zero connection personally to the Holocaust. My whole family from all sides arrived in this country before World War I even. But having had some, loss and trauma, for lack of a better word, I really did get that message that it's beyond just a story of the Holocaust. It really is a story of the human spirit and hope. And I really do think you've gotten that across.
I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you so much. It's very encouraging, and I'm happy that that message came across. Thank
Good.
you.
Let me just say again that I very much enjoyed the film. I'm assuming that all of our viewers who are tuning in today did as well. And I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope you'll let us know if the reality of getting them all together with their families in Israel comes to fruition.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So once again, thank you to all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, and all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, SAGE, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all these years. And thank you, our audience, for participating in the 25th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival. And thank you so much for sharing your beautiful film with us.